Alright, learning target 2.1. So this is all about finding the mean, the median, interquartile range, and if there's any outliers. Okay. So to find the mean, it's pretty simple. That's our average, right? So all we do is we add everything up. So I take 4.75 plus 5.75 plus 6.25 and so on. We just keep adding them all together, which I believe these are written in order, so that makes it nice, especially for the median. So I add these all up and I get a total of 120. Then we're going to divide by how many there are, which there are 12, 17. So I go 120 divided by 17, and we get 7.06 is our mean, which we put that X with a little bar over it is our mean. Okay. Now the median, we just find the one in the middle. Okay, that's the easy one. So we start eliminating highest and lowest till we come up with our median, which in this case is 7. Then to find the interquartile range, we use that median to find the first quartile. So 1, 2, 1, 2. So in between 6.75, right, and 7. So I find the average of those two. 6.75 plus 7 is 13.75 divided by 2 is 6.875. So that's my first quartile. My third quartile, I do the same thing. So in between 7.5 and 7.5. So the interquartile range is, we take 7.5 and we subtract 6.875, giving us an interquartile range of 0.625. Okay. Now, to see if there's any outliers, what I do is I take that interquartile range and I times it by 1.5. Giving me 0.9375. Then I subtract it from my first quartile and add it to my third quartile. And that's going to give me the ranges that if it's lower than the smaller one or higher than the bigger one, it's going to be an outlier. Okay? So when I subtracted it, I get 5.9. Okay, if I look at this, there's actually 2 outliers here on the lower end that are lower or smaller than 5.9. Okay, on my upper end, and it was actually 9.4. Okay, we've got 8.44, so we've got an outlier on the upper. Okay, so sometimes that does happen, that you get outliers on both sides. Alright, now we take a look at number 2. Okay, now this one we're going to do on the calculator here, so you can take a look at it on the calculator. And while we're at it, we will do number 6 as well. So those two are going to be done on the calculator. You'll see those done, and then we'll go on to the next ones. So I had made this video and I thought I was screencasting, but apparently I had some issues with the sound. So I'm going to be probably a little bit behind because I'm recording the sound after I've made the video, okay? But when we're on the calculator, first thing we want to do is we want to go to a new document, okay? So as soon as I get ready to go, there we go. Alright, new document, we want data and statistics. There's no list in the problem, so we hit Control Doc. That gives us lists and spreadsheets. Okay, we go up and we label our list first. This is the car weights, I believe, so we're going to go with that one first. And then we just put our data in, and it doesn't matter the order you put the data in. Okay, it just, the calculator will sort it all out, so you just have to put in the data, and then you're ready to go. Now, we don't really need the graph necessarily in this case. So there's other things that another way that we can do it from the lists and spreadsheets to figure out what our mean, our median is, and then we can use that to find our interquartile range and to see if we have outliers, okay? So we hit menu, statistics number 4, stat calculations 1, and then one variable statistics. We only have one list, so we just hit OK. Then we tell it what list we're dealing with. We're dealing with the car list, so I choose the car. Can use that drop down to click it as well. And then the only other one I need to worry about is the first result column. I just want to make sure it's not overriding any other columns that I have. So we make sure it's 1, we hit OK, and then that X bar, that stands for our mean, okay? So our mean is going to be 1,450.3 repeated, right? And we can round that up to just 0.3. If I scroll down, I can see the minimum, first quartile, third quartile, maximum, and also right there, my median, so 1,460. And so that gives us the two pieces, the mean and the median, fairly simply, okay? Then what we can do to figure out the interquartile range is we've got the third, it's the third minus the first quartile. So if I hit that calculate button on the left side, I can pull up my scratch pad, okay? And if I hit escape, it'll bring it right back to where I was at. So again, I hit that little calculate button, I type in my third quartile, check to see what my first quartile was, subtract that as well, and there's my interquartile range, okay? Pretty easy right there. Then you got to remember to find, we multiply it by 1.5, and that number we then add to the third quartile, and that tells us any number beyond that is going to be an outlier. Then we take the first quartile and we subtract what the interquartile range times 1.5 was. So I have those two numbers, okay? If it's higher than 2347.5, it's an outlier. If it's less than 527.5, it's an outlier. So that gives me kind of the parameters for outliers. All right, so then we check to see if we have an outlier, okay? So another way we can do that is by actually graphing it, okay? Which we should know how to do. Plot type, change it to the box and whisker. That's the one that's going to show us if there's an outlier, okay? And if we see it, we don't see any dots, so that means there isn't an outlier, okay? Now, just to kind of show you what it would look like, if I take one of these numbers, okay, and I make it much bigger or much lower than our two parameters, okay, 3,500 was definitely bigger. Then I go back to my graph, click on it again, see that dot to the right? That's an outlier, and that's what you're going to see, okay? And even if I play around with it, you can see that it's still an outlier until we hit about that, 24, 25 range based on the fact that, we had a bigger number there. Okay, that's what makes it adjust. And you can even go down and see to the right or to the left. If I pull more numbers, it doesn't quite affect it that much. Okay, but normally you don't play around with it to find an outlier. Okay, you just, it just means it's far beyond where it should be. All right, now let's go up to the top and do the second problem. So if we hit all the way up, we can delete that, and we can delete those numbers as well. We don't need them anymore. So next one we're doing is the income one. So again, we label it, and in the column, we start typing in our numbers. So we just put that data in there. And sometimes it takes a while, especially as the numbers are bigger. Okay, Then we change it to the income, and we can go straight to the graph. We can use the graph to see what the median is right there as well. Okay. See the lowest first quartile, median, third quartile, as well as the highest number. Okay. And we, because we don't see that a dot, that means there's no outlier. And we can go back here and we can again hit menu, number 4 statistics, 1 stat calculations, then the 1 variable. And we hit OK. As you can see, I go through pretty quick. Change it to income. And again, that X bar is our mean. Okay. So there's our mean right there. And then we go down and we see our median as well. Okay. And then if we want to calculate the interquartile range, we take that third quartile. We type it in, the 38,251. Okay, we hit that calculate button on the left side up below the escape. Then we can press escape to take it back there. Get our first quartile. There's our interquartile range, which we take that and we times it by 1.5. That's how we then figure out what's going to be an outlier and what's not going to be an outlier. So we take the third quartile and add that special number. We don't really have a word for it. So anything above 92,000 would be an outlier. We take our first quartile and we subtract that number, which again, it's a negative number, so you're not going to see that. All right. Looking at number 3, test scores, okay? So, again, we are finding the mean, median, interquartile range, and outliers of the given data, okay? So, first thing we want to do is put them in order, which they're already in order, so we don't really have to worry about that, okay? So, let's add them up and see what we get. So when we add them all up, we end up with 767, which we're going to divide by, looks like there are 17, right? Let's see. Yes, so divide that by 17. And we get for our mean, right, we use that X bar to represent mean, we get about 45.11764771. So we could just say 45.1, round it to that, okay? Now, to find our median, pretty easy, right? We'll just use an M for that one. So I eliminate the highs and the lows until I come up with one that's in the middle. Oops, I think I did that one too many times, right? There we go. So then we end up with 44 as our median. Okay, with that, now we find to get that interquartile range, right? IQR. We take the third quartile, we subtract the first quartile, and that's what's going to get us our interquartile range. So to find the third quartile, that's my halfway point. So I start finding the median of the upper half of data. So 51 and 51, which in between gives us a third quartile of 51. Then we get 39 and 42. So if it's hard to see exactly where the middle of that is, you add them together, divide by how many there are, which is 2, and we end up with 40.5. Okay, so our interquartile range is 10.5. Now, to find out if there's any outliers, okay, what we do there is we take that interquartile range and we times it by 1.5. Okay, so that would be 15.75. Then, at this 51, I'm going to add 15.75, the third quartile. We end up with 66.75. So, are there any that are above that 66 mark? Nope. So, from our third quartile up, there's nothing. Then we take our first quartile and we subtract it. So I've got the 40.5 and I'm going to subtract the 15.75. Or 15.75. So 40.5 minus 15.75, which gives us 24.75. So I look at my lowest ones and see if there's any below that. there isn't, so there's no outliers in this case. Okay, we're done with that one, so let's jump on to number 4. Okay, again, same idea. So we start off with our mean and our median, then our interquartile range. Okay, so we add these all up. We get 128, and then we divide that by probably 15, and that gives us about 8.53 with the 3 repeated, so about 8.5 for our mean. Then we start counting above and below the same amount. We end up with a median of 7. Okay, that's our middle point. So now we need that third quartile, right? And that first quartile to get our interquartile range. So the first quartile is 4. Oh, that's our first quartile. Got to make sure you're not mixing them up. Our third quartile is 12. 12 minus 4 gives us 8. So our interquartile range is 8. Then we times that by 1.5. So 8 times 1.5 gives us 12. So I go 12 plus 12 for my upper boundary, and that's 24. So 18 is definitely not bigger than 24, so no outlier in that direction. Then I subtract it. 4 minus 12 would be a negative 8. We definitely didn't go below that, so there's no outlier here. So you can decide, now that you've seen the calculator and by hand, which one you prefer, okay? So it's kind of up to you guys which one you do. Let's see, we now are moving on to number 5. We already did this one, didn't we? Okay. So, number 5. Again, we've got these luckily in order, so that helps make life a little easier. So average, so for the mean, we add them up, and we get a number, and divide it by 17, and we get 8.29, so we're going to round out to 8.3. Then our median, okay, 3 higher, 3 lower, 3 lower, 3 higher, 1 lower, 1 higher, 1 and 1, so we get a mean of 8.5, or median of 8.5, which is pretty close to our mean, isn't it, in this case? Then, to find the interquartile range, again, we need that third quartile minus that first quartile. So, higher or lower, lower, higher, 9 and 9, which would give us 9 for the third quartile, right? Because it's just the median of the upper half of data. Then lower, higher, higher, lower, 8 and 8. So in between that is 8. So we get 9 minus 8, which equals 1. Okay, so interquartile range of 1 means there's not very much variability here, is there? And we take 1 and we times it by 1.5, which we get 1.5. So I'm going to add 1.5 to 9, and we're going to subtract 1.5 from 8. So when I add it, we get 10.5, which our highest number is 10, so no outlier above. When I subtract it, we end up with 8 minus 1.5 should be 6.5, right? So 6.5, which if we look at this one, we have a 6 here, right? That 6 is an outlier. So we have an outlier at 6. And again, when you use the calculator, you can just use that box plot, and it kind of shows you what the outlier looks like. So you don't have to worry about it so much there. Okay, number 7. Let's take a look at that one now. So these numbers are a little bit bigger, but again, we just add them all up. Divide by how many there are, and there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 total. Okay, so we just find out what they all equal. And by the way, I'm using a calculator. I'm just pausing the video, calculating it, and then telling it to save time. So we end up with 285,334, which we divide by 11. And that gives us our mean of 25,939.45 repeated. So we'll just say 0.5. Okay, then median, we treat it just the same way we do the other one. So we take away a lower and a higher and a lower and a higher, lower, higher, and we end up with our median of 20,929. Okay, then we need that third quartile minus that first quartile to get our interquartile range, right? Okay, so that's our middle point. So for the upper, we're going to end up with that 43,332. Okay, so 43,332. We subtract the lower one, which lower and a higher. We're going to end up with, what is that, 1855? So 18,055, and that's going to give us 41,477. So that's our interquartile range. Quite a big range. There's quite a spread here, isn't there? And we take that and we times it by 1.5 to determine if there's any outliers. Okay, we do that, and from here, because that's our third quartile, we're going to add the 62,215.5, which is what we got. From this number, we're going to subtract the 62,215.5. Now, that's way too small. It's going to be a negative. You can't have a per capita income on a negative, so we don't even need to bother to see what that is. Okay, but we add this one, 43,332, and we get 105,547.5. So I believe our biggest was 78,000, so there's no outliers here. Okay. All right, so it's just the same thing over and over, given different pieces, okay? So we've already seen how to do it on the calculator, so I don't think I need to do any more on the calculator, so let's just bust these out. All right, so the birth rates. Again, everything's in order, so we get the mean by adding them up, dividing by how many there are. Looks like there's 9 total. We get a total of 2330.35. Divide that by 9. We get 2.594 repeated. So let's just round that to 2.6. I'm fine if we round generally to the 10th. Okay, then the median. So 3 below, 3 above, 1 and 1. So our median is 1.8. Now for our interquartile range, we take the median of the upper half, which if I look at this, it's going to be somewhere in there. So I take those two, 2.66 plus 4.09, gives me 6.75, divide by 2, and we get our third quartile as 3.375. We're going to subtract our first quartile, which is going to be in between 1.5 and 1.61. So 1.5 plus 1.61 equals 3.11. Divide that one by 2. We get 1.555. So I take 3.375 minus 1.555. That gives me 1.82, and that is my interquartile range. Okay, now to see if there's any, oops, not a Q, outliers. All right, those are just beyond the rest of the data. We take that 1.82 and times it by 1.5, which gives us 2.73. Then we're going to add it to the third quartile for our upper half of the data. We're going to subtract it from the lower quartile for our lower half of the data. Now, we've got 1.5 minus 2.7 basically. I know that's going to be negative, so I know there's no outlier below. However, we need to add these two to see what we get. And we get 6.105, which our highest was 5.93. So there are no outliers. Okay? All right, life expectancy. We do the same exact thing, right? And there's 10 of them here. So we're going to find some number and divide it by 10 for our mean. Then we get our median and our interquartile range, and then we go from there, okay? So we get 681.1, okay, which we divide by 10, which should be an easy division. So 68.11, 68.1 for our mean. Then we take a lower way, a higher way, higher and a lower, lower and a higher, higher and a lower. So our median is going to be in between Pakistan and Azerbaijan. Okay, so it was 67 plus 71.5, right? Because we're taking this plus this, dividing it by 2. That's we're finding the middle one between those two. And we get 69.25. Okay, it's our median. Now, This left side is going to be where our first quartile resides. Okay, pretty easy to see. First quartile of 61, third quartile of 74.6. So 74.6 minus 61. And that is our interquartile range of 13.6. Then we take that 13.6 and we times it by 1.5, don't we? That's going to give us the number to find the outliers. And we get 20.4. So I add to 74 20.4, and I get 95, which our highest was 81.5, so definitely nothing higher. I take 61 and I subtract 20.4, right? That's 0.6, that's 0, that's 40. Anything below 40.6? Nope. So no outlier here. All right? Simple as that. All right. Now let's take a look. What if we have a dot plot? Well, we treat it basically the same exact way. Now, sometimes dot plots can be pretty easy to do because if we look at this, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 twos, so 9 times 2 would be 18. 4 threes, which is 12, right? Then 1 4, 2 5s, which is 10. So 18 plus 12 would give us 30, plus 10, 40, plus 4 would be 44. So 44 divided by, how many do we have? So 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So 44 divided by 16 gives us 2.75, which we should probably be thinking because there were so many 2s that they would be dragging down that mean. Then we start figuring out from lower to higher. We end up with our median in between those, which means our median is still 2. Then we find our third quartile, right, and our first quartile. So the upper half of data, we start down here, and here, 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 and here. So it's between 3 and 3. So it's going to be 3. Then our other one, basically they're all 2, so it's 2. So we get 1 for our interquartile range. Then, are there any outliers? This data is pretty close together. So I doubt there is, but let's double check. Sometimes there are. So 1 times 1.5 is going to give us 1.5. So I take 3, add 1.5 to it, and I get 4.5. So I actually have 2 outliers at 5, don't I? Then 2, we subtract 1.5, and we get 0.5, which nothing was below 0.5. So we do have 2 outliers, 5 and 5. Okay? So even though that data looked really close together, you still run into the case where you have some outliers like that. Okay? All right, number 11. Same idea. Now, if I look at this one, I'm guessing that might be an outlier because it's so much further removed from the data. But we do have to double check. So let's find our mean, our median, our interquartile range, and then see if there are any outliers. Okay? So we've got a 0, which we don't really add that. But then we've got 2 4s, so 8, 2 5s, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 6s, so that's 42. Then 14, then 8. 8 and 8 make 16. 16 and 14 make 30, and 10 make 40. 40 and 42 give us 82. 82 divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 82 divided by 15 gives us 5.46 repeated, so 5.5 we'll say. Okay, now our median. So start with a low, eliminate a high. Start with 2 lows, eliminate 2 highs. 2 more lows, 2 more highs. 2 lows, 2 highs. So we get our median at 6. Okay, then to find our interquartile range. 2 high, 2 low, a high and a low. So we get 5 for our first quartile. And then 1, 2, 1, 2. 1 and 1, we get 6 as our third quartile. So 6 minus 1 is 1, interquartile range of 1, times it by 1.5, and we get 1.5. So if I add it to 6, that's 7.5. We have an 8. So we have at least one outlier. Okay, so we have 8. What about on the lower half? So we subtract by 1.5, and that gives us 3.5, which we have that 0, which we suspected. So there's actually an outlier on either side in this case, because there's so much data right here, especially those 6s, that's kind of dragging it down. And it's all tight together, so slightly above gives us that. All right, last two. So these ones are a little bit different. They're not technically histograms, okay? So the way we look at it is that there were 7 in this first year. In the second year, there was 8. Third year, there were 5, and so on. So the way we have to treat this is just looking at the number of Nobel laureates, okay? We kind of don't really pay attention to the years as much. And actually, these ones don't make much sense, so I think I'm going to eliminate these ones from doing it. I think we've seen enough examples, and when we have the test, we won't have any of these plots like this. So let's just get rid of those ones, and let's just call that good. So hopefully that helped you either by hand or on the calculator, how it is that you can find the mean, median, interquartile range, and the outliers. Okay, whether you use the calculator or whether not, it's up to you.